When people discuss Anne Boleyn's death, they always want to answer the question, was she guilty or innocent? I'm going to tell you in this video that she was actually innocent, but I want to take you through what she's been through. I'm writing a book on Anne Boleyn that is forthcoming for next year, and for me that was the most difficult thing to write. I was highly emotional going through the sources and looking at what Anne Boleyn had to endure. And the reason why is that I think if you're someone who really cares about fairness, equality, justice, you look at what happened to Anne Boleyn, you realize that you have none of it. Anne Boleyn was far from being perfect. You have a detractor saying, oh yes, but she had a bad temper and she hurt, Catherine of Aragon, and she hurt Princess Mary. And all of this might be true, that obviously they were not on best terms. But I would like you to remember that obviously Catherine of Aragon and Princess Mary were not super nice to her. And we can understand why. But what I'm saying is that there are lots and lots of lies and myth around Anne Boleyn. This is why we're so drawn to her story, because we want to uncover the truth. And can we have the real truth if we take away everything that it's about her own experience? I doubt it. And though we don't have her words, all of her words, we have a last speech that we're going to discuss in this video, but though we don't have everything, can't we try to understand who she was? Can't we try to understand what she went through? The true crime of Anne Boleyn was to have miscarriages. Not just once, but a few times before that. In 1535, notably, and obviously the last one in January 1536. The miscarriage she suffered in January 1536 is the one that is going to seal her fate. At that point, she has no chance to remain Queen of England. She has no chance to remain the wife of the king, of her husband. Please, if you haven't already, go and check my video on the relationship between Anne Boleyn and Henry VIII, because I want you to understand how tragic and how shocking it is for a man who pursued her for years and is going to discard her like a tissue. He's going to no longer care about her like he never cared about anyone before. So it's quite crazy when you look at their relationship and how they got together, the love letters they have together, the fact that it's love or not love, or toxic passion, not toxic passion. Again, go see my video. But here it's more about what happened. Is it just about the miscarriage? Is it about Anne being her own free woman? Is it about Anne challenging the patriarchy? Is it about Anne challenging men's authority? It is a combination of all of it, I believe. In 1535, there were already signs that things were not great and not right between Henry and Anne. But there were still moments of very strong closeness between the couple, especially during the summer progress of 1535. We could almost imagine that they were still very happy with each other. However, it is also true that Anne realized, and I discussed this again in detail in my forthcoming book, she realized that she was losing her connection, her allies in France. She begged the French secretary to help her reconcile with the French ambassador who just came, Chabot, who just came to England, and who left her with a very bitter taste in her mouth because he kind of not really cared about her, which was a bit weird to see that France, her biggest ally for years, had started to turn its back on her. She's starting to realize how precarious her position and situation was. And I don't want to give you the quote that I have in my book because I want you to read this book. But it is so moving when she goes and talks to this secretary and she's like, I am in danger, kind of thing. And it's 1535. So we're not even in the middle of the crisis that starts in 1536. One thing that I also find extremely fascinating in the story of Anne is how her fate is intertwined with Catherine of Aragon's. As long as Catherine is alive, and she doesn't realize that, as long as Catherine is alive, Anne Boleyn is safe. Because Henry's choice is only Catherine or Anne. And he doesn't want to go back to Catherine because he doesn't want to go back to the Pope. And he doesn't want to keep Anne because Anne keeps having miscarriages. And so here, when Catherine died in January 1536, and there's lots of rumors of she's been poisoned by Anne, or Anne ordered the poisoning of Catherine of Aragon. I honestly can't buy this lie at all. I think it's just her detractors trying to make her look worse. But we don't have any evidence of it at all whatsoever. So, but when Catherine dies, and Anne is pregnant, as long as she's pregnant, she's safe, until we know the sex of the baby, and so until she delivers the baby. But then she's going to have a miscarriage shortly after. And that's the end of her. Because now Henry has the choice to do whatever he wants. And that is quite tragic for Anne, because her tragic end really starts in January 1536. And it's going to drag on until May, 19th of May 1536, when she's going to be executed. But also, she's going to fight. She's not going to realize it, and she's going to even have hope that it's not going to go down that hill. And she's going to try everything she can to remain Queen of England, to remain married to Henry. And I don't think she understands that her life is in danger until the whole trial happened and the horrible things these men told her. It is undeniable that one of the men behind Anne Boleyn's downfall is Thomas Cromwell. In late March 1536, Anne and Cromwell were clearly fighting the ultimate power struggle of who would ultimately remain in favour of the king. Anne was convinced that the religious reforms that Cromwell wanted were not good for the people of England. Anne had a big, soft spot for the people of England, despite the fact that apparently they all hated her and all preferred Catherine. She thought that Cromwell and her husband were a bit too greedy with the dissolution of monasteries, keeping all the money for themselves, instead of helping the ones who needed it the most. And here we have a reminder of Margaret of Angoulême, Queen of Navarre, her mentor, who was exactly the same in France and in Navarre, who always favoured charities and people who needed her help. So we have a real parallel, again, that goes beyond religious beliefs, between Margaret of Angoulême, Queen of Navarre, and Anne Boleyn. Obviously, having a woman telling men what to do, it didn't go well. Because Thomas Cromwell realized that even in March 1536, after her miscarriage, she still had lots of influence, she still had her voice, she still used it. He knew that if he did nothing, she would get him. He was very scared that Anne Boleyn would do to him what she did to Cardinal Wolsey. He blamed Anne Boleyn for the downfall of Cardinal Wolsey, even though it really helped him. Here we have again a power struggle between factions at Henry's court. But the one who ultimately made all the decisions, the one who was the master of his fate, was Henry. And for him, Anne had betrayed him because she failed to give him a son. Cromwell made decisions at the time, in March, April 1536, where he got closer to Chapuis, the imperial ambassador, the representative in England of Charles V. Chapuis and Cromwell met a few times in secret to discuss the terms that would be agreeable to Henry. What could they do to make Henry's life easier? Obviously, that meant getting rid of Anne, one way or another. And because there was little chance that Anne would accept to be sent to a convent or to be discarded so easily, a plot is going to be formed, but a plot that even Chapuis, who had his eyes and ears at every corner of the Henrician court, didn't see coming. On the 26th April 1536, Anne Boleyn thought that she would go to Dover with Henry. There was supposed to be a meeting again between Henry and Francis I of France, and Anne had to go with Henry. But that meeting was going to be cancelled last minute for no good reasons, and Privy Council, led by Cromwell, would meet a few times. Even Chapuis again didn't know what was going on, and he felt that maybe Cromwell was playing against the Spanish and the Habsburg. So there was a real tensions, there was a real conspiracy, there was like fears. No one could trust one another. And I want you to understand that. I want you to put yourself in those days where everything is uncertain, which is very rare at court. I mean, you always have gossips, you always have uncertainty, but you always have like informants, you always have people who can tell you what's going to happen. You always have spies. And no one knew. Everything was concealed so well that Anne had no clue what was going on. Chapuis had no clue what was going on. On the 26th April, Anne Boleyn met with her chaplain, Matthew Parker. We don't have the exact conversation, there's no record. What we know is that he promised her to watch over her daughter if anything happened to her. We know that it's a promise he kept as he served Elizabeth as Archbishop of Canterbury from 1559 until his death in 1575. These closeness, like this watch over my daughter, though Anne didn't understand the scale of what was going to happen to her, she had a bad feeling about it all. The next day, on the 27th April, the Parliament was unexpectedly summoned. There was a clear emergency, and rumours started spreading at that time that it was around Anne's removal as Queen of England. Anne was still oblivious, and she still thought that she was going to Dover with her husband. The trip was cancelled, and little by little, there were rumours that Anne was now unfit to be queen. When it comes to understanding Anne Boleyn's downfall, you also have to understand that we all know that she had kind of a bad temper. And on the Saturday, April 29th, 1536 still, Anne Boleyn had an altercation with Henry Norris, who had been promised to her cousin, Mary Chelton, and who had kept delaying the union. And Anne Boleyn was furious with him for not wanting to marry her cousin. And she told him the famous line that is going to be used against her for treason against the king. You look for dead men's shoes, for it all came to the king but good. You would look to have me. Meaning here that she was implying the death of the king, which was a high treason. And this was used against her for saying that there might have been something between her and Henry Norris, absolutely ridiculous, but also saying that she was basically plotting against Henry VIII. Also, absolutely ludicrous. The Treason Act of 1534 forbade even imagining the king's death, and tried to backpedal, but it was too late. She tried to claim that is not what she meant, that obviously she would never imagine the death of her husband, and honestly we can believe that. I really believe that Anne Boleyn was sincere in her feelings with Henry VIII, even though he was a monster. The 2nd of May 1536, Chapuis finally revealed to Charles V in one of his letters what was going on at Henry's court. The great disgrace of the concubine, Anne Boleyn, who by the judgment of God has been brought in full daylight from Greenwich to the Tower of London, conducted by the Duke of Norfolk, the two chamberlains of the realm and of the chamber, and only 4 women have been left to her. The report is that it is for adultery, in which she has long continued with a player on the spinet of a chamber, who has been this morning lodged in the Tower, and Mr. Norris, and the concubine's brother named Rochford, George Boleyn, has also been lodged in the Tower. Anne Boleyn was accused of adultery against the king and of high treason against the king. There was no way out anymore. But what was so sad is that all these men who were accused to be her lovers were going to have the same fate as her, and they were all innocent. One man who voiced his concerns bravely in many ways was Thomas Cranmer. He said, "If the reports of the Queen be true, they are only to her dishonour, not yours, Your Majesty." He's writing to Henry VIII. "I am clean amazed, for I had never better opinion of a woman. I was most bound to her of all creature livings, and therefore I beg that I may, with your grace favour, wish and pray that she may declare herself innocent." Thomas Cranmer is not going to go too far and not annoy Henry VIII too much with it. But I find it so brave that he said something that really doesn't sound like Anne. That really is quite weird. Basically, he said, "I cannot believe that a woman who put up with you for years, Henry, that literally she would go out of her way to have so many lovers, be seen at every different court." We're going to go through that. So being so stupid, right? I love that he said it. Not in those words like I said it, but it's the gist of the letter. And I love that he said it. I love that someone said it, because she was innocent. Anne was sent to the Tower, and there she felt lost and powerless. She talked to Sir William Kingston, the constable of the Tower. She asked, famously, "Shall I go into a dungeon?" He replied, "No, madam. You shall go into the lodging you lay in at your coronation." And here she cried, saying, "It's not good for me." She didn't really understand why she would stay in the same rooms, same lodgings that she stayed for the coronation. In many ways, it could be seen as nice, but also very cruel, to remind her of her love story with Henry VIII, when we knew that right now he had no love for her. Then continued talking to him, and she asked something that I found profoundly touching. "My mother will die with sorrow." The fact that she thought about her mother's pain, her mother's grief, I think gives us a glimpse into Anne's personality. We always see her as this fiery, feisty person with a bad temper, when actually she was also someone with a very big heart and who really cared about the people she loved. Then she asked this question, "Will I die without justice?" And the constable replied, "I'm afraid the king has justice." This is so, the question of justice in this downfall is quite the main theme of it. And the fact that she knew at that point, I think, wow, okay, the king has justice, all right, so it probably means that I won't have justice. It means the king gets what he wants. And surely that's something Anne always knew. But it must have been so hard to be confronted to it when what he wants is basically you gone, right? And I find it really, really, really moving, the fact that she asked that question. A few days later, he came back and saw her again, and here she said, "I have done nothing. They cannot bring witnesses, as there are none." It was resolute in her innocence and claiming it. She really believed that she should try to get justice for herself. "Your Grace's displeasure and my imprisonment are things so strange unto me as what to write and what to excuse. I am altogether ignorant. But do not imagine that your poor wife will ever confess a fault which she never even imagined. Never had a prince a more dutiful wife than you have in me, Anne Boleyn. You chose me from a low estate, and I beg you not to let an unworthy stain of disloyalty blot me and the infant princess, your daughter. Let me have a lawful trial, and let not my enemies be my judges. Let it be an open trial. I fear no open shame, and you will see my innocence cleared, or my guilt openly proved. But if you have already determined that my death and an infamous slander will bring you the enjoyment of your desired happiness, then I pray God He will pardon your great sin. My innocence will be known at the day of judgment. This letter gets me, I'm sorry. You might think I cry all the time. I don't cry all the time. But anyway, this letter really, really gets me. She signed it as well. My last request is that I alone may bear the burden of your displeasure, and not those poor gentlemen who I understand are likewise imprisoned for my sake. Anne Boleyn is going to try to defend the men's lives that are at stake. And again it shows us that she was not all fiery and feisty for the sake of it. She was all fiery and feisty for justice. This letter didn't work, and there's going to be a trial. There's going to be a trial of the men first, and then of Anne Boleyn. On May 15, 1536, Anne was tried alongside her brother George. And you have to understand that here again she was tried by men who wanted her downfall. Sometimes say wanted her downfall. Did they have much choice? I'm not sure you can really go against Henry's will. And that's where when we discuss, was Henry a puppet king or was Henry a master, the master of his own fate? I really tend to lean on that side, the master of his own fate. He's the one deciding who's in favor or not. He's the one deciding you'll live or you die. Cromwell should have learned that, I think, in 1536 and should have been more careful, though again he didn't see it coming in 1540. That's another discussion probably. But the accusations made against Anne were vile. She was accused of adultery, but when you really look at the document, and other historians, authors, history writers have done the same work, where you look at where she was when the accusations were made and where they were, when she's supposed to be and doing, So for example, it was claimed that on October 12, 1533, so let's say a month after the birth of Elizabeth I, and I'm laughing here, sorry, because there's no way anyone would have touched my body a month after the birth of my son, but whatever. So it was said that a month after the birth of Elizabeth I, she had intercourse with Henry Norris, and that in November the same year, they had again sexual intercourse at court, 1533, at court, in the open, hey, I'm being, unfaithful to my husband. It doesn't compute, honestly. Many more accusations were made against her, and at times and places where Anne could not have been physically present and with different men. She's accused that in November 1535, so after this massive summer progress with her husband where they become close again together, it was said that she had incited her own brother, George Boleyn, to violate her, alluring him with her tongue in his mouth. Apparently, after that, she had not enough of this, so she pursued and convinced William Brereton to engage with her in sexual intercourse, and again with Sir Francis Weston, and then again with Mark Smitten. They were all accused, all these men and Anne Boleyn were accused of having met and conspired the death and the destruction of the king. I want you to imagine that it's a list of accusation, and Anne Boleyn was facing that, of place and dates that didn't match where she was. So they said, you had intercourse in Hampton Court, we know she was in Greenwich. You had this, in Greenwich, we know she was in Hampton Court, or Richmond, or we knew that she was not there. It didn't matter. Though I expect that when you try to bring someone's downfall, you do it well. You try to at least make it a bit viable, but apparently it didn't matter. Anne's downfall was a foregone conclusion. After such accusations, and there are lots of them, Anne stood up for herself and pleaded not guilty. The verdict didn't last long. Shortly after she said not guilty, they told her that she was found guilty and that she'll be burned or beheaded as shall please the king. Anne Boleyn tried to fight this, and according to Lancelot de Caux, was the secretary of Castelnau, the French ambassador, he reported that Anne remained composed when receiving the sentence, but still fought for her life, and for their lives, for the men's lives. I believe you know full well the reason why you have condemned me, which is other than the one you have deduced from this trial, for I am clear of all of it, and I have no need for God to pardon me for it, nor even grant me any grace for it, for I have always been faithful to the king. And for this reason, I wish that this last speech serve only to give solace to my sense of honor and that of my brother and of those men whom you have judged to die and have estranged from their good reputation, such that I wished I have had the ability to defend and deliver them and take on for myself 1,000 deaths. Again, Anne Boleyn was trying to save these men's lives. On the 17th May 1536, George Boleyn, Henry Norris, Francis Weston, William Brereton and Mark Smeton were executed on Tower Hill for crimes they had never committed. Anne was to be executed the next day, but there was a delay with her swordsman. One might believe that this delay gave her hope that maybe Henry had a change of heart. He didn't. On the 19th May 1536, Anne Boleyn had to meet her fate. And she said, "Good Christian people, I am come hither to die, for according to the law, and by the law I am judged to die, and therefore I will speak nothing against it. I am come hither to accuse no man, nor to speak anything of that whereof I am accused and condemned to die, but I pray God to save the king, and send him long to reign over you. And thus I take my leave of the world and of you all, and I heartily desire you all to pray for me." I think in her end we see the true Anne. Someone imperfect and so perfect. Someone with a true heart and soul. Someone so far from the title of the whore of England. Someone who died because of injustice and still died with dignity. I hope you enjoyed this video, and I'm gonna make more videos, obviously. The next one will be on Anne Boleyn and her daughter Elizabeth. I think there's lots to discuss as well. Thank you so much for your support, and thank you so much for watching. I really do appreciate it. See you next time. Bye.